Hi everyone! What do you think of the new set? I decided to redecorate a little bit. What do you guys think? Kidding. We're at the Twilight house. I'm so excited. Shout out to my friend Marissa. It's Marsha here on YouTube. She's also on Twitch. We're here for her birthday. It was her brilliant idea to rent the Twilight house. And I thought, what a perfect opportunity to do my analysis, talk about Midnight Sun. What a finale to our Twilight series. And my idea for this video has just grown and grown and grown to the point where I'm basically making a fan film at this point. And that's okay. I'm having a blast. I'm having so much fun. So I really hope you guys enjoy watching. If you're new to the channel, if this is your first of my videos, some of it's gonna be skits. Some of it's gonna be me just analyzing the book, Midnight Sun. Right away, one of the first things I noticed about Midnight Sun is just how thick it is. Look at this in comparison to the first book. Look, that's insane. These cover the same story. And as we dive into the analysis, I think I figured out why it's so much longer. And so we will discuss that eventually, but I feel like it's better discussed with context. But this book is 817 pages long to the original book's 400 pages. So it is twice as long. It was published in 2020. Stephanie Meyer, after finishing the original 4 books, had published a novella and a out-of-canon gender swap, but she hadn't really put out like a Twilight book since she had finished the original 4 books. These other ones were just kind of little fan service, like fun anniversary sort of thing. So Midnight Sun was a really big deal, and she actually was working on it for quite a long time. The rumor is, now we do not know this for certain, but the rumor is that the plan actually was for Midnight Sun to be released in 2015 instead of Life and Death, but it got leaked. And when I say it got leaked, I mean a large portion of it got leaked. I did not write in my notes, unfortunately, exactly how many chapters, but I believe it was at least a quarter of the book, and people hated what they were reading. And bear in mind, this was a really early draft. So I don't know who in Stephanie Meyer's orbit did this to her. It's honestly really sad because I cannot imagine being an author, especially an author with as much attention on you as Stephanie Meyer and as famous as Stephanie Meyer, to then have a draft leaked and have everybody read, I mean, your garbage essentially. Like, a first draft is bad. It's always gonna be bad. So somebody basically took one of Stephanie Meyer's like early drafts where it is just kind of her getting out the story and kind of marking out what she wants and getting the general vibe, maybe getting a plot in place, maybe not, and put that on the internet for people to read. So people were very critical of the book. People were saying it wasn't that good. And Stephanie Meyer was really upset about this, as you can imagine. And as a reaction at first was sort of like, I'm never putting this book out now. I don't ever want to publish it. I'm never going to put it out in its final form. Fuck you guys. And went on to write Life and Death for the 5-year anniversary or 10-year anniversary or whatever of the finishing of the original, or the publishing? Was it the 10-year anniversary of the publishing? I think Life and Death was the 10-year anniversary of the publishing of the first book. And Midnight Sun was originally the book she was going to release for that. And then they were like, no. And she wrote Life and Death instead. So a lot of the fans were pretty upset about this, as you can imagine, because I don't know about you guys, but I would much rather just wait for the final book release and actually get the book than get to read it so early, get a half-finished version of it that isn't that good, only to then like never get to read the final thing. So there were a lot of people that were pretty upset about this, and eventually in 2020, Stephanie Meyer did put out Midnight Sun. Now, it received very mixed reviews. Some people loved it, some people hated it, and in my opinion, it kind of ties back to what you wanted out of it. From what I can tell from Googling around, from reading reviews and all of that, there are people who really wanted Stephanie Meyer to retcon some of the things from the original series that they did not like. Things that I have commented on over the course of talking about Twilight on this channel. You know, Edward being a little bit of a stalker in that first book. Edward being somewhat like controlling and emotionally manipulative. If you were looking for her to fix some of those things, for her to explain that there was some kind of secret danger that Bella never knew about, that was what Edward was protecting her from, which is why he was stalking her. Meaning there was actually like a reason, as opposed to him just being like, oh, she's a fragile human, I need to protect her. Or if you were looking for her to finish anything else she got criticism of over the years, you would be sorely disappointed by this. To put it simply, Stephanie Meyer said, fuck all y'all, I stand by everything I said, I stand by everything I did, these characters are exactly who you interpreted them to be in the original book, and to that I say respect, honestly. And I'll tell you right now, before we get into the video, before you get too invested, I am a Midnight Sun defender, okay? So if you do not want to watch what is surely going to be over an hour of me explaining to you why I actually really like this book, then you might as well just click out now, okay? Because that's what this video is going to be. I respect it. I do. She said, Edward's crazy as hell. I wrote him to be crazy as hell, and I'm going to keep him crazy. And not only am I going to keep him crazy, but I'm going to show you his internal monologue so that you can understand exactly how crazy Edward is. But the other thing that's really, really fun about this book is that we get so much vampire lore. And so that's what I'm saying. People's opinions on this book vary, in my opinion, depending on what you wanted out of it. If you wanted Stephenie Meyer to retcon some of the things from the original series, essentially give Edward an actual reason to have been following Bella around as opposed to him just like being insane about her and stalking her for real, then you are going to hate this. But if you are an avid Twilight fan who just wanted a bunch of vampire lore and to be inside of Edward's mind for the first book and to see how he thinks, how his mind reading impacts the way he interacts with the world, and how Alice's visions work, and getting a whole bunch of other lore about the vampire world and all of that, then you would love this, because that's what this is, really. So yeah, with that, let's dive into my actual thoughts on the book. The book opens on the Cullens at school, most specifically in the lunchroom. Edward is bemoaning their presence at the high school. He refers to it as purgatory. He remarks how boring he finds high school to be, which right away brings us to one of the biggest confusions that fans have about this series. It's understandable that the Cullens want to interact with the human world, but a lot of people don't understand why they go to high school because homeschooling exists, right? So even if they wanted to pretend to be super young, they could just pretend to be homeschooled by Carlisle. I have like kind of two defenses of that. The first is their whole reason for pretending to be human is to be able to interact with the humans and live relatively normal lives and not be so lonely where they only interact with other vampires. So homeschooling doesn't really help them do that, you know what I mean? It doesn't help them interact with the human world more. But not only that, it's just, you know, sometimes authors do things that are convenient for the narrative, and that's okay. They go to the high school so that Edward can meet Bella at the high school because it's a teen romance. Like, I don't know what to tell you. So I've never really understood that criticism. I mean, a lot of people have mentioned that they could have just lived in a bigger city and hidden kind of amongst the populace and never have had to move, right? They could have lived in Seattle or something. I don't think Seattle is a big enough city that they would never ever have a situation where they run into somebody that remembers them from 20 years ago and recognizes them and realizes they haven't changed. But I would also say, as much as I'm about to analyze this book for probably over an hour, if you're that caught up on the fact that the Cullens go to high school, you're probably thinking about this book a little bit too hard. Like I said, it's convenient for the narrative. He goes to the high school so that he can meet the other high school girls so that they can have a high school vampire romance. Because it's a high school vampire romance, you know what I mean? But they're at the high school and Edward is bemoaning the fact that they're at the high school. He calls it purgatory. He doesn't really enjoy it. So we're introduced to the lunchroom through Edward's mind and are immediately introduced to the fact that he can read minds. Edward finds the human mind to be very trite and very boring. We care about superficial things. We're never thinking about anything that deep. We're only focused on ourselves. And to be fair, if he's at a high school and he's only reading high schoolers' minds, you can understand why he maybe feels that way, because I think those are the dominant traits of a teenager. You know, self-absorption in general. That's just kind of like the age for that. You know what I mean? So Edward kind of tunes them out, and we are introduced to each of the Cullens through their minds and what they're thinking about in the present moment, which I really, really love as an introduction to both Edward and the rest of the characters. That being said, Jasper in this moment is like really, really struggling to not drink a human girl's blood. And this remains a constant throughout the rest of this book, that Jasper really, really struggles being around humans. And we see that with Edward reading his mind and how difficult a time he has it at the school. I do not understand why they would put all those kids at risk. I mean, I know they have Alice, so if it gets really bad, then they'll know ahead of time, but how far ahead of time? The thing that gets kind of confusing and nebulous about Alice's powers is like, how far out do they stretch? Like, if Jasper makes the decision to go to school in the morning and that decision leads to him drinking a human's blood, would she see that or not? Or would it be when Jasper actually makes the split-second decision to do so? And in that case, kind of feels like it's too last minute to save the day. You know what I mean? So why are they risking it? Like, why have Jasper at the school if he is struggling that much to not drink human blood? But anyway, Edward is sitting there just generally being a Debbie Downer, reading his fellow vampires' minds and then kicking Jasper's chair when he realizes that he's thinking about drinking a human's blood. When he notices the new girl. Now, he knew the new girl was coming because it's the talk of the town, and because it's the talk of the town, he can read it in everybody's mind, right? But he didn't really care until he realizes he can't read her mind. And we, the reader, realize that this is the scene from the original book when Bella sees the Cullens for the first time and when Jessica explains to her who they are. The way that he realizes that he can't read Bella's mind is that he hears in Jessica's mind the name Cullens, and it like calls out to him, you know, kind of like somebody actually calling your name, like he's like, oh, she's talking about us, and tunes into her mind, sees that she's explaining to Bella who the Cullens are, and then attempts to read Bella's mind to see what she thinks of them. And this is where we kind of find out that Edward is a bit of a guardian of the family in this way. They are trying to blend in with the humans, and so it's good to know if any of the humans are like suspicious of them not being human, and Edward is how they do that. So he goes to tune into Bella's mind to see what she thinks of the Cullens, and very quickly finds out he cannot read her mind. This has never happened to him before in the history of his powers. He's always been able to read everybody's minds of everybody around him, so this really throws him. He then starts kind of really tuning into the conversation that she's having and reading the minds of everybody around her and watching the conversation and trying to figure out like why he can't read her mind. And this is the part where he's kind of staring at her and Bella's like, oh my God, he's staring at me. Why is he staring at me? And right away, we're introduced to one of my massive complaints about this book, which is, like I said, Edward kind of has this view of all humans, that they are so trite and so boring and so uninteresting, and they care about such superficial things, and they're just like, they just kind of suck. And so it's like, well, why do you want to be around humans if you have this opinion of them? Like, it's really strange. But not Bella. Bella's not like the other girls. She's different. And so this is that like classic YA, she's not like other girls, she's different thing, but it's through Edward's mind. Now, this idea is sort of present in the first book. There is sort of this feeling that Stephenie Meyer is painting out Bella to be this like different human girl from the other human girls, but it's never really explicitly stated. Like, there's no point where Bella thinks to herself, I'm not like the other girls, I'm different. You know what I mean? Bella is herself a very kind person, and so her thoughts are painted very kindly, and she never really thinks, how do I explain this? Like, she doesn't really like Jessica, in my opinion. She never states this explicitly in her mind, but the way that she thinks about Jessica kind of tells us that. But she never in her mind is like, I'm different from Jessica. Jessica cares about all these superficial things that I don't care about. She just like isn't Jessica's biggest fan. And so it never really bothered me in the original series, even though Stephenie Meyer is kind of painting her out that way. It's not explicit in the way that it can be in other young adults, in a way that's very irritating. However, Edward's internal monologue is very, very, she's not like other humans, she's different. And this will be a constant throughout the entire rest of the book. And it is very frustrating at times because it's like, I get it. Okay, he's in love with her. Maybe through his view, this is true, that she's like so different from the other humans, but it just personally felt a little icky. It's not my favorite thing, but he already kind of notices this about her in watching the conversations that she's having in the lunchroom, that she seems very kind and very down to earth and very not like all the other humans at the school. Then we go to the biology scene where he actually meets Bella for the first time and sends her blood. And this is the scene where he's like gripping the table and he stares at her like he hates her and all of that, and Bella's like, what on earth is going on? This is a really just like funny and tiny and niche thing that I noticed, but I guess canonically, Edward is in the aisle. Because the movies and the books have existed in tandem so long in my mind, I have no idea how I imagined this scene before the movie, but in the movie, Edward's by the window and Bella is in the aisle. So whenever I've reread the scene in the book, I've always pictured it that way, but it very specifically mentions that Edward leans away from her into the aisle to try and get fresh air. So Edward is in the aisle seat and Bella is in the window seat. Just a fun little tidbit. Now he starts to think through all these different ways that he can lure her away, that he can kill her. He's never scented a blood like this in his life. It completely takes him over, and it takes all of his self-control and all of his like over 100 years of sacrifice and training himself to not drink human blood, to not literally kill everybody in the room so that he can drink her blood. And at the end of this chapter, he decides to leave Forks so that he doesn't kill her, because he really, really doesn't want to do that to his family. At this point in time, he doesn't really like care about Bella or Charlie. He doesn't know them at all. He knows Bella's name, I'm pretty sure, but outside of that, like knows nothing about her. His not wanting to kill her is him just generally not wanting to kill humans because he's committed to a life of not killing humans, but also because he doesn't want to do that to his family. We are led to believe that most of the family have had slip-ups and have accidentally drank humans' blood over the years, and that they have had to move as a result at times. So Edward leaving Forks at this point in time isn't really about keeping Bella alive as much as it's about not wanting to take a human life and not wanting to force his family to move to avoid suspicion. So he decides to leave and go up to Alaska and stay with their friends, who are the only other coven of vampires that they know who don't drink human blood. The next chapter opens on him in Alaska, and we see the dynamic between him and Tanya. Now, we find out in the original 4 books at some point that Tanya has a massive crush on Edward and has been trying to you-know-what with him for a really long time, and he has always told her no. And this is part of his whole like virgin history and the fact that he's like really never had any desire to have sex with anybody before Bella. He's just not wanted to do that. This kind of comes up with Bella, and at some point he mentions that Tanya has been trying to do that with him for a long time. Now, it's unclear whether or not Tanya actually wants a relationship with him or if she just wants something physical, but it's implied that Tanya has just been very like adamant about the two of them having sex and is very confused about the fact that he doesn't want to have sex with her. And even later in the scene is like, I'm not used to rejection, and like, why don't you want to sleep with me, and like all this stuff. And it's just kind of weird. With time away from Bella and the scent of her blood, Edward starts to feel kind of silly about the fact that he ran away and is like, you know what, I've got an iron will. Human blood has smelled good to me before, and I haven't drank it in a very long time. I'm good with my self-control. I'm not going to run away from my family. I'm not going to like stay away indefinitely just because of this one pesky human girl. I'm going back to Forks. So he fills himself with as much animal blood as he can, and then he returns back to Forks, where he goes back to school, and instead of being hateful towards her or like resentful, he starts to be more curious about her because he can't read her mind, right? And this, he directly mentions that this curiosity kind of got forgotten in all of the chaos surrounding her blood, but now there's this combination of the fact that her blood smells really good to him and he can't read her mind, and these things make him very curious about her, and he is kind of watching her through the school day through other people's eyes. He's nice to her when they get back to class, and she's super confused by this. We know this scene in the original book. But the fun thing about watching this scene through Edward's eyes is that Mike is really jealous and gets really upset about the fact that Bella and Edward are talking during class, and it was just kind of fun to read. And that's the thing that, like I mentioned kind of at the beginning of the video, continues to be very fun about this book, is Edward's ability to read the other human's mind. So we don't just get Edward's perspective on this original book, we basically get every other character's perspective except for Bella's, because Edward is able to read everybody's mind. And so we get little moments where we know what Mike was thinking in a scene that we're familiar with, or we know what Jessica was thinking in a scene we're familiar with, or we know what Carlisle was thinking in a scene we're familiar with. And that is a super duper fun aspect of this book. Edward is growing more and more curious about Bella and is a little bit wary about it, and is still kind of on the fence about whether or not he's going to leave again. And this time just leave for a few years until Bella graduates high school and then come back afterwards. But then the car accident scene happens. You know the one where Edward saves Bella's life impossibly, that lets her know that he's not human. The description of him saving her from his perspective is crazy, and it further emphasizes this weird subtext that Stephenie Meyer puts into this book that's never explicitly stated. It's almost stated by Edward at times, but like never super in depth. And the way that life and death ended actually also supports this. The idea that, like, from fate's perspective, Bella should have died in this car accident. The world, the universe, whatever, wanted Bella to die in this car accident. That was when she was supposed to die. And Edward stepped in and stopped that from happening. And so that is why, after the fact, there is all this danger surrounding Bella and all of this, like, targeting of her, because she's supposed to be dead. And then eventually she's turned into a vampire, which is like the equivalent of being dead. And that's when everything chills out. It does kind of feel like Final Destination. Now, like I said, Stephenie Meyer never explicitly states this. I don't know that she's ever in any interviews said that that's what has been going on. But if you remember at the end of Life and Death, quick spoilers for Life and Death, Beau gets turned into a vampire at the dance studio instead of surviving it as a human. And so they fake his death. And at some point he says to Edith, that he was supposed to die in that other car accident. So when they feel bad about the fact that Charlie and Renee both lost their son, they say, well, they would have lost me if you hadn't saved me. So in a way, like, you gave them a few more months with me, even if they lost me now. And I feel like at some point in the original 4 books, this sort of conversation also kind of happens between Bella and Edward. And Edward so often remarks of how crazy it is that Bella's life is threatened so often. And this is further supported by the car accident scene from Edward's perspective, because he's trying to make it so the car doesn't hit her or land on her. And in the scene from his perspective, he has to like move her around a bunch and like push on both cars a bunch. Like, it's not nearly as cut and dry as what happens in the original book, where she's like, oh, he just kind of like jumped in and stopped the car and like swung her around a little bit. He's like stopping the car, and then the car's like swinging around and trying to hit her here, so he has to move her here, and then the car's swinging around this other way and trying to hit her here. And he literally thinks to himself, oh my god, it's like the car is like drawing itself to her. It's like it wants to hit her. And I think this kind of further emphasizes this thing that, like I said, it's never been explicitly stated, but it really seems like Stephenie Meyer is going for this, like, Bella should have died here, and because she didn't, the universe is kind of trying to take her out as time goes on, and eventually with her becoming one of the undead fulfills that like universe need for her to be taken out, if that makes sense. Now, he moves so fast to save her that he remarks that no human eye can see it. The human eye can't usually see objects that are moving faster than about 550 miles per hour. So that means that vampires canonically can move 550 miles an hour, or at least that Edward can. It's remarked at many points in the series that Edward is the fastest of the Cullens, and that he is very fast for a vampire, so maybe he's the only one that can run that fast, but holy cow, that's really fast. That's crazy. After they get to the hospital, we find out that Edward is not actually able to read Charlie's mind super explicitly. He can read Charlie's emotions, but he can't actually read his internal dialogue. So he starts to wonder if Bella's brain, like if it's a genetic thing almost, where Charlie kind of has this weird brain, and so Bella sort of inherited it, for lack of a better way to put it. This is one of the few things to come out of this book that garnered new criticism of Stephenie Meyer and the way she wrote Edward. I don't really care about this, to be honest, but I'm going to tell you about it because it's the video I'm making. I'm doing the analysis, I'm talking about the fan reaction, all of that, but I think this is kind of silly, admittedly. For some people who afterwards said that it was kind of messed up of Edward to never disclose to Bella that Charlie's mind was weird to him too, he never tells her that during the series. And when we meet Renee, or when Edward meets Renee, I should say, at the end of the book, we find out that her brain is also weird, but both of her parents have kind of weird thoughts. Not quite how Bella's are, but different from anything that Edward has experienced. And it seems like this is the first time he's really experienced that at all. So this is the first like set of humans that have strange brains to him. And he never tells Bella that. Now, the most likely reason for this is just because I bet Stephenie Meyer didn't come up with that until she was going to write Midnight Sun. So in her mind, Bella's brain was weird to Edward because she was going to eventually become a shield once she became a vampire. But because she wasn't a vampire yet, they didn't know that. So this is just one of her weird human quirks, and it's something she's going to take into her afterlife. And then upon writing Midnight Sun, was like, oh, what if this was kind of a genetic thing? What if Charlie and Renee also had strange brains? That's the most likely reason why that wasn't included in the original 4 books. I guess maybe I understand why people think it's weird that he never told her that, but I don't really understand saying it's like messed up. Like, maybe it's strange that he never mentioned it to her. And again, like I said, I bet it's just because Stephenie Meyer hadn't thought of it. But I don't think it's like that messed up of him to have never mentioned it to her. Like, I think it's fine. The next scene is Edward then dealing with the aftermath of having saved Bella's life in such a unnatural way and having essentially put the family at risk, not really from the humans, but if the humans find out that they're vampires, and obviously they're going to be in trouble with the Volturi. And so it is putting their family at risk in that they don't want to garner the Volturi's ire. And so Edward has this conversation with the rest of the Cullens. Now, remember when I told you the original idea for this video has just like spiraled out of control? Something came out recently that allows me to not have to describe this scene to you. I can just show it. And so I'm going to promptly.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to put any of you at risk.
It was thoughtless, and I take full responsibility for my hasty action.
What do you mean? Take full responsibility? Are you going to fix it?
Not the way you mean. I was already planning on leaving before this happened. I'll go now. The situation will resolve itself.
No, Edward.
It's just a few years.
Esme's right, though. You can't go anywhere. That would be the opposite of helpful. We have to know what people are thinking now more than ever.
Alice will catch anything major.
I think Emmett is right, Edward. The girl will be more likely to talk if you disappear. It's all of us leave or none of us.
She won't say anything.
You don't know her mind.
I know this much. Alice, back me up.
I can't see what will happen if we just ignore this. We can't allow the human a chance to say anything, Carlisle. You must see that. Even if we all decide to disappear, it's not safe to leave stories behind us. We live so differently from the rest of our kind. You know there are those who would love an excuse to point fingers. We have to be more careful than anyone else. We've left rumors behind us before. Just rumors and suspicions, Edward, not eyewitnesses and evidence. Evidence? Rose, let me finish, Carlisle. Doesn't have to be any big production. The girl hit her head today. So maybe that injury turns out to be more serious than it looks. Every mortal goes to sleep with the chance of never waking up, and the others would expect us to clean up after ourselves. Technically, that would make it Edward's job, but this is obviously beyond him. You know I'm capable of control. I would leave no evidence behind me.
Yes, Rosalie, we all know how proficient an assassin you are.
Edward, please. Rosalie, I looked the other way in Rochester because I felt that you were owed your justice. The men you killed had wronged you monstrously. This is not the same situation. The Swan girl is entirely innocent. It's not personal, Carlisle. It's to protect us all. I know you mean well, Rosalie, but I'd like very much for our family to be worth protecting. The occasional accident or lapse in control is a regrettable part of what we are. To murder a blameless child in cold blood is another thing entirely. I believe the risk she presents, whether she speaks her suspicions or not, is nothing to the greater risk. If we make exceptions to protect ourselves, we risk something much more important. We risk the essence of who we are. It's just being responsible. It's being callous. Every life is precious. It'll be fine, Rose. The question is whether we should move on. You could keep your present age, of course. And have to move again that much sooner? I like it here. There's so little sun, we almost get to be normal. Well, we certainly don't have to decide now. We can wait and see if it becomes necessary. Edward seems certain of the Swan girl's silence.
Jasper, she won't pay for my mistake. I won't allow that. She benefits from it then. She should have died today, Edward. I would only set that right.
I will not allow it.
And I will not let Alice live in danger, even a slight danger.
Aww.
You don't feel about anyone the way I feel about her, Edward, and you haven't lived through what I've lived through, whether you've seen my memories or not. You don't understand. I'm not disputing that, Jasper, but I'm telling you now, I won't allow you to hurt Isabella Swan.
Jazz, don't bother telling me you can protect yourself, Alice. I already know that. It doesn't change. Aww. That's not what I'm going to say. I was going to ask you for a favor. I know you love me. Thanks. But I would really appreciate it if you didn't try to kill Bella. First of all, Edward's quite serious, and I don't want you two fighting. Secondly, she's my friend. At least, she's going to be. Going to love her someday, Jazz. I'll be very put out with you if you don't let her be. See? Bella's not going to say anything. There's nothing to worry about.
Alice, what does this?
I told you there was a change coming. I don't know, Edward.
What, Alice? What are you hiding? Is it about the girl? Is it about Bella?
No, Edward. Ugh, that is so annoying. It's solidifying. Every minute you're more decided. There are really only two ways left for her. It's one or the other, Edward.
I have to leave.
I don't see you going anywhere, Edward. I don't know if you can leave anymore. Think about leaving. I'm not entirely sure it's asked for Edward. If he thinks she's a danger to us.
I don't hear that.
Not right at this moment. Will you risk her life, leave her undefended?
Why are you doing this to me?
I love her too. Or I will. It's not the same, but I want her around for that.
Love her too?
You're so blind, Edward. Can't you see where you're headed? Can't you see where you already are? It's more inevitable than the sun rises tomorrow morning. See what I see.
No, I don't have to follow that course. I'll leave. I will change the future.
You can try. Oh, come on. Pay attention. Alice sees him falling for a human. Aww. How classically Edward. Fall for a human? For the girl he saved today? Fall in love with her? What do you see, Alice? Exactly. It all depends on whether he's strong enough. Either he'll kill her himself, which would really irritate me, Edward, not to mention what it would do to you, or she'll be one of us someday. That's not going to happen. Either one. It all depends. He may just be strong enough not to kill her, but it will be close. It will take an amazing amount of control, more than even Carlisle has. The only thing he's not strong enough to do is stay away from her. That's a lost cause. Well, this complicates things, I'll say. I suppose the plans remain the same, though. We'll stay. We'll watch. Obviously, no one will hurt the girl. No, I can agree to that. If Alice only sees two ways. No. No.
You can't even see Arrow. Hang on, I have Arrow on my shirts. To further back, do you guys want to be able to see Arrow or no? I feel like this is like weirdly far back for me to be sitting in the shop. But anyway, we're in the kitchen. So as you just witnessed, the Cullens have mixed reactions to finding out that Edward is in love with Bella. And I've got to be completely honest with you guys, I am surprised that Rosalie was the only one who had such a stark reaction to it. I'm sorry, I feel like Rosalie is the only practical one of all of them. Jasper's like, yeah, we should kill her, but it's mostly just to protect Alice. And once Alice is like, everything's fine, Jasper's like, I guess everything's fine. Rosalie is like, guys, everything is not fine. A human knows that there's something weird about Edward. And this is framed out to be like a crazy opinion of hers. This is framed out to be like negative. And it's like, oh my God, can you believe that Rosalie doesn't approve? And she's like framed out to be this like massive bitch. And I'm like, I don't know. I kind of agree with that. Like, obviously I don't because I love Bella and I know how the whole series goes. So I, the reader, am privy to information that Rosalie does not have. But given the information the Cullens have at the time, I actually completely agree with Rosalie on this. And I feel like I would react in the same way. Justice for Rosalie. So then Edward goes full stalker mode. And this is something that I actually really appreciate about this book. She could have given him a reason to be so overprotective of Bella. She could have provided some sort of danger that Bella wasn't aware of. Some vampire that wants to drink her blood, some weird third mythical creature we never met in the original series. But instead, she just triples down. She's like, Edward's insane. I wrote him to be insane and I kept him insane. And you guys are gonna read 800 pages of him being insane and you're gonna like it. And you know what, Stephenie Meyer? We did. Listen, I don't know what to tell you. I'm a Midnight Sun defender. I warned you guys about that, okay? I actually really respect the fact that she was like, nope, I made him crazy and I maintain that and I'm sticking by that. And you guys just have to deal with the fact that he's a crazy stalker and that you fell in love with a crazy stalker and that your favorite book series from when you were a kid features a man who starts out as a crazy and deranged stalker. And that's something you need to cope with, not me. And also, I've spoken about this so many times through the Twilight series, it will never cease to amaze me how accurately Stephenie Meyer writes some of these things. Like, Edward is emotionally manipulative, and we see the impact that that has on Bella, and all of it is pretty realistic. Like, her not really understanding his feelings for her, not understanding his anger, and thinking there's something wrong with her, and trying to figure out how she can behave around him to stop him from being mad at her and things like that. Like, all of that is a very realistic reaction to somebody who's being emotionally manipulative. When we're inside of Edward's minds, a lot of people who have criticized Midnight Sun have actually talked about how his whole thought process of, I just have to make sure she's safe. I just have to have my eyes on her. Like, I'm not aware of any acute or real danger, but I have to keep my eyes on her to make sure she's not in danger because I care about her that much. A lot of people have criticized the book by saying that is a very realistic stalker mindset. Like, people who do stalk people IRL have this like deranged idea in their head sometimes that they're protecting that person and that that person wants this, right? Now, Edward is never delusioned in this early bit into thinking that Bella would want this. Like, he feels very badly about doing it and he seems aware of the fact that it's like creepy and weird and wrong, but he can't stop himself from doing it. And like I've already said, a lot of people criticize the book for that. I don't know. The more I think about it and the more Twilight I consume and the more I sit in this wonderful house where they filmed this movie, you know, characters don't have to be perfect. And I think a lot of the hate is the fact that he's like the romance hero and Bella doesn't seem bothered by what happened. And I criticized that when I reviewed the first book, that like we really shouldn't be teaching young women that this kind of behavior is romantic. At the same time, continuity wise, it all just tracks and all the characters, like, they stay consistent
and their reasonings stay consistent and their justifications stay consistent. And I have to respect it. Like, even if I don't think it's 100% great that like he's our romance hero and he's behaving like this, she wrote a very accurate stalker. And that's what he is he's her stalker before he's her boyfriend. And it's realistic. And it works. And I can't find myself mad at it. So this whole part has him going into her bedroom for the first time and kind of watching her while she's at school. And at first it was just a curiosity, but after his whole conversation with the Cullens and Alice saying something about him being in love with her, he starts to maybe wonder if it's more romantic feelings and things like that. And this part is so cool because I've already mentioned that one of my favorite things about this book is how much of Edward's mind reading we really get and how just worked into everything about how he interacts with the world the mind reading is. And him watching Bella go about her day at the school through all these other kids' minds is so interesting to me, especially because he can't control how other people think. He can only view what they're thinking about. And so it talks about how he jumps from mind to mind based off of who can see Bella in their periphery and who's thinking about her in the moment and who's having a conversation with her and things like that. And so he's kind of jumping from mind to mind that he's really focused on to be able to watch her whole entire day. I just think it's so cool. It's very cool to watch him use his powers in this way, even if it's a little creepy, even if it's a little stalker. Like, it is fun. I'm sorry, it's fun. And that's how I feel about it. And I don't want to hear it. And then they have the whole lunchroom convo where he pulls the angsty, like, what if I'm the villain? Like, sorry. And it's so like 17-year-old, it's so angsty. Like, what if I'm not the good guy? What if I'm the bad guy? Ah, I love it. I love it, you guys. I'm sorry. I'm having so much fun on this trip and I'm having so much fun doing this analysis because I just love it. I love the series. It's so goofy. It's so fun. And if you don't think it's goofy and fun and you don't like it, then that's fine. I don't understand you. And I think you might be a slightly boring person if that's how you feel, but you're entitled to your opinion and I'm entitled to mine. And mine is that this book is fun and the series is fun, and that's all. That same day is the blood type class in bio, and the part that's really fun about that scene is that Mike was the one who was supposed to take her to the nurse. And we very much pick up on the fact in the original book that Mike is very jealous when Edward shows up and picks her up and stuff and takes her to the nurse instead of Mike. But it's really fun to like read Mike's internal monologue through all that and then see what Edward thinks of it and stuff. And it is just really funny to see Edward like discovering jealousy. That's another thing that I really like about this book is Edward has told Bella a lot throughout the original 4 books that she woke up a lot of feelings in him that he hadn't felt in a really long time. Passion, lust, romantic love, but also things like jealousy and this capacity for rage that he just hadn't felt before that because he hadn't had a reason to. And it's really fun to watch him kind of have these feelings about Mike and not really understand them, especially before the conversation with Alice where she talks about love and all that. His confusion as to why Mike's thoughts about Bella make him want to like put Mike through a wall and stuff like that. And he's like, why do I care about the thoughts of this like random human? I don't care about him at all. And it's fun to watch him like slowly discover that he's jealous and that the feeling that he's feeling in these moments is jealousy. So then there's a scene that is just like the Cullens hanging out. And this is a really big lore drop, basically. Fan service, whatever you want to call it. We just get an in-depth view into what the Cullens are doing with their time. And this brings us to why this book is so unbelievably long. It's about double the length of the original book. And it's because we get all of the scenes basically that we get in the original book. There are very few scenes that we don't see through Edward's perspective because he's so creepy and so weird and such a stalker that even if he wasn't physically present, he's either watching it go down through somebody else's eyes or he's hovering in the trees and watching it go down and she just doesn't realize he's there. And so we get all of the scenes that we get in the original book, but Stephenie Meyer has established that the vampires are just able to think so much quicker than the humans. So he just has so many more thoughts in every interaction than Bella had. So the same scene in both books sometimes takes up to twice as long because of how much more we're getting inside of Edward's head. And he'll occasionally go off on these giant like memory tangents. And then it'll say when he comes back and tunes back into the conversation that Bella wouldn't even have noticed that he zoned out because it would have only been a few seconds. And so it just extends the length of the book. But not only that, we get these extra scenes that weren't in the original book that show the Cullens and their interactions with each other and their relationships and kind of what Edward's life was like before Bella and what the vampire life is like more in depth. And I think it's all really cool and it's really fun. And this book very much is fan service. Like, I don't think that it's for anybody that isn't already a fan of
the books. Like, I don't think you should start with Midnight Sun for sure. And if you don't already love Twilight, I don't think you would like this book. It's for the people that love the series, that want the lore drops, that want to see this in-depth stuff, that want to know all the histories of the vampires, that want to know what the Cullens are up to when they're not at school. That's what this book really exists to show. But that's also why it's so long, because it's the entire original book basically is in there. So those original 400 pages are in this book. You're just seeing it through Edward's eyes, and then there's 400 more pages, either of his internal monologue within those conversations or of these extra scenes. So we see the Cullens at their house, and Emmett and Jasper are playing a game of chess that has, let me check my notes, yes, 8 chessboards. How does that make sense? Chess is played on a square, Stephanie. You would need 9 boards, so you could do 3 and 3, but they have 8, which means that they aren't able to make a square. There's no layout that really makes sense except for 4 and 4. I have a few follow-up questions though. Is it hamburger? Is it hot dog? Like, do they have it this way where like it's really long? I doubt it, because then they would have like a bunch of the game where they're just like marching the pieces down the board until they actually hit each other. So it probably is hamburger now that I think about it. And then they just have all the pieces here, and then which king is like the king? Because again, it doesn't split evenly. You know, if they have 4 and 4, then there's no like middle king. So which king is like the big king? Which king are you supposed to checkmate? Or do you have to checkmate all 4 kings? Is that even statistically possible? Are any of you chess nerds, can you figure out how many situations there can be in where if you had like 4 boards and 4 sets of chess pieces and 4 different kings that you were trying to checkmate, like, are there ways you could have the board arranged even where that could happen? I just feel like we threw that in there. I know I'm being nitpicky, but Stephanie Meyer is so rarely lazy, and she so rarely throws in details that aren't thought out, that I just can't imagine that she didn't at least remotely think through how they would have played this game. And I would love a breakdown from her as to how they actually would have. Because if it was a 9x9 board, then I would just think that they had the 1 king and then a bunch of extra pieces that they used, and they played it on a square the way normal chess is played. But because they have to play it like on a line, I would assume, because of the amount of boards that they have. How do they play? Break it down for me, Stephanie. Also, my Lego model only has 1 chessboard, so that's not lore accurate, Lego. Then Edward starts playing piano, and the whole house is like, Edward's playing music again. And it's all very metaphoric. She's woken up the music in him. He's feeling artistic, he's feeling creative, because she's just brought this out of him because he's falling in love with her and he doesn't even know. Ugh. Then Alice sits at the piano, and here's the thing. It remarks that she sings 2 octaves above the melody. So that's like, you know how there are like whistle notes that are so high that they can only be heard by like dogs? Like, there's such a high frequency that humans can't even hear them, or can barely hear. She's like almost singing in that range. I just don't think it would sound good. Like, it's made out to be like it's this melodic thing. I don't think Stephanie Meyer plays music. I don't know that she understood what it meant to say that, and it would sound crazy, I think. Then we see Edward and Emmett hunting. This is another little fan service moment. We get to see them hunt, because the only other hunt that we see in the whole series is Bella in Breaking Dawn. At one point, it's like her first hunt ever. So it's kind of fun to see Edward and Emmett, who have both been hunting together for a very long time, go on a hunt. Edward very cleanly just kills his mountain lion, drinks the blood, and is over with it. Whereas Emmett like wrestles the bear. And Edward kind of jokes that it's like the bear won the first round because he did kill Emmett, and then Rosalie managed to get him to Carlisle before he fully died from the mauling, and that's how he ended up a vampire. So Edward kind of jokes that he has this like vendetta against bears, and that's why he likes to fight them. And then Emmett mentions to Edward that Edward and Bella can't ever have sex, and it's just a really funny conversation for them to be having. I mean, I guess they are brothers in a way, and maybe they're having a little bit of a bro moment, but Stephanie Meyer just so doesn't write them to have bro moments together, and I think that actually makes sense. Like, not that they aren't good friends, and I mean, Edward loves Emmett. In fact, it kind of feels like Emmett is Edward's favorite sibling, although he'll tell you his favorite sibling is Alice. But I don't actually think that's true. I think his feelings towards Emmett are just always so positive, and he just loves Emmett so much. They don't bro out. Both of them, I don't know when Emmett, do they ever establish how old Emmett is, or like when he was born? I don't know that we know that canonically, but Edward is like from so long ago that like what broing out looks like to them would look different to us now. So they don't really ever chat together, you know what I mean? So it was kind of like funny and alarming to see them have a conversation where Emmett's like, but you can't like touch her, like is that gonna be weird? And so it just like made me giggle, I don't know. Just guys being dudes, talking about sex, you know how it is. And then we get the scene where he goes and watches her read in the backyard. Now we know the scene from Bella's perspective, and we're never explicitly told that Edward was watching her in this time, but it's very heavily implied. And so we just kind
kind of get confirmation here that he was actually watching. And then we get further emphasis on him not really being able to read Charlie's mind. And it's actually kind of fun because we watch as he starts to like interpret Charlie's behavior and try and figure out what he's thinking based off of his emotions. Because like I said, Edward can read his emotions, he just can't read his mind. It's just fun to watch him try to like figure out what Charlie's thinking.
A few moments later.
It's so hard to know what Charlie's thinking about. I can only read his emotions. Right now I'm getting joy while he looks in the fridge. That must mean he's excited for dinner. I can't be sure, he's just such an enigma. Oh, he's disgusted by what's ever in that creamer bottle. I wish I could understand him. I wish I could read his mind. Maybe it would give me a little bit of insight into Bella's. It's just so fascinating. I've never experienced anything like this before. He's also disgusted by what's in the water? I guess he doesn't have anything to drink. Now he's sad. He was thirsty. I see. Maybe he's not so hard to figure out after all.
We're in Bella's room. This is easily the coolest room in the house, I think. At least in my head, so much more of the movie takes place in this room than it really does. We rewatched the movie last night before we filmed Marissa's video, which is a drunk retelling of the original movie. It's very, very funny. Definitely go check it out. I will link it. But we were watching it, and having been here now, I started to notice how many scenes actually take place here. And every time the house was shown in any way, we were like, oh my God, we're like here right now. That's the outside, that's the living room. And so I had in my head that like Bella's room was where the majority of the shots in the house took place, but that's not actually really true. But still, when we got here, I feel like this was the coolest room to see. They have it pretty much identical to how it was in the movie, so it's very fun. All the way down to like this really weird dog painting that's just like on her nightstand. I don't know why that's there, but it is in the movie, we saw it. But where were we, kids? Where were we? So then we have the whole Port Angeles scene. This is where Bella goes dress shopping with Angela and Jessica. And while they're there, she splits off to go to a bookstore, and these guys corner her, and Edward saves her from the whole thing. So we're at that part, right? So from Edward's perspective, it's especially fascinating because, as I've already established, we've seen a lot with his mind reading powers and how he uses them to interact with the world, and how it's just such an ingrained part of how he behaves is the fact that he can like read people's minds. And so he's just kind of like chilling, driving around Port Angeles, trying to stay in the shade because I think it's a sunnier day. And he isn't really worried about Bella at all because Port Angeles, it's like a tiny town. Only Bella Swan could run into trouble there, you know what I mean? And he's just kind of loosely tracking Jessica and Angela's mind. And because they're not really worried about anything and they're just kind of dress shopping, he doesn't notice that anything's wrong. And then at some point, one of them thinks, wow, Bella's been gone a while. I wonder where she is. And that's when he realizes that she's not with them. And then he starts hunting through the city for her. Now, there are two really cool things about this for me. The first is that we again see how he cannot control what other people think about. He can only monitor it. So because Jessica and Angela hadn't really thought about Bella and he didn't notice like the thought of her leaving them, he had no idea she wasn't with them. He just assumed that she was and that they weren't thinking about her, or that she was like sitting in the corner being really quiet and wasn't really like contributing to the conversation. And so he can't like control where people look. He can't control what they see. He can't control what they think about. He can just read it. So then this leaves him in the dark. The other thing is that because he's so used to reading people's minds, when he goes to hunt for Bella, he realizes that he cannot very easily track her because he can't read her mind. So normally in this situation, he would just, well, I mean, I don't know when he would have been in this situation in the past, trying to like find a human in the city that might be in danger, but he just kind of casts a wide net with his brain and would in this situation be looking for her and her thoughts and presumably be able to like find her and locate her as a result, but he can't because he can't read her mind. So then he starts freaking out because he doesn't know how he's going to track her, but then he ends up recognizing her in the minds of the guys that are attacking her and is like, oh, there she is. But then by that point, she's like in danger. So then that's where the whole scene of him like skidding in with the Volvo comes in. And my big question for this part specifically is how much of this did Stephenie Meyer have in mind when she was writing the original book? And I have that thought a lot through this book, where I'm like, what of this was stuff that Stephenie Meyer knew when she was writing the original book and just didn't put anywhere, and how much of it was stuff she came up with after the fact? Because Edward obviously swoops in and saves her at the very last minute. Like, she's already in danger by the time he comes about. You know, I can't say that I thought about it too hard when I read it as a kid. To me, it was like, he's not going to reveal the fact that he's following her until she's actually in danger. So she ends up in danger, and then he reveals that he's been following her in order to save her. And so I think that's kind of like the rationale that I had in my mind. But obviously from his perspective, it's like, this is why he swooped in so last minute. And knowing the way that Edward is, he probably would have like self-sacrificed. And if he knew that those men were going to target her and he was like a lot closer to her, he probably would have stepped in to deter the assault and never would have told her that that's what they were planning, and just would have revealed the fact that he was following her around and being kind of creepy. And so I guess it makes sense that there was like a reason why he wasn't nearby enough to be able to do that. But that's where I don't know if Stephenie Meyer had like thought of that ahead of time, or if her thought was like, yeah, he's not going to reveal himself until she's actually in danger, or if she just really wanted the like dramatic scene of him swooping in to save her very heroically. And so that's just like all she thought about at the time, and then she like came up with all this other stuff later as to why that happened. I have no idea, and I would love to know. If she's ever done an interview about this, can you guys link me to it? Because I would love to know like how much of this book she actually already knew and how much of it she came up with when she was writing the book from Edward's perspective. I just think that's so fascinating. There's a random line where he's thinking in his head about his time hunting people like these men that were about to attack Bella. If you're not familiar, Edward kind of had a rebellious teen era where he broke away from Carlisle's whole let's not drink human blood, let's just drink animal blood thing. And because he could read minds, could go around and target people who meant harm to other human beings. And in his head, it's almost like make the world a better place by taking some of these bad people out of it. And he has this thought about how, you know, some people basically have like a split personality, and they have like one person that lives in the light and one person that lives in the dark. And I just had the thought of like, what if he killed Dr. Jekyll? Like, what if that's kind of like the joke Stephenie Meyer was making? And now I need to look up when Jekyll and Hyde takes place. Not when it was published, but like, when does it take place? It was in like the late 1800s. Dang it. I wanted to have my own little canon in my head where Edward killed Jekyll. I think that would be funny. This is also so nitpicky, but there's so many points in this book, and this is not unique to Midnight Sun, okay? This isn't unique to Twilight. This is a whole romance thing, and it's something that bothers me every time, and I'm gonna use now as an opportunity to talk about it. Whenever somebody talks about a heart rhythm being irregular because they're like into somebody, so your heart rate can speed up and slow down, but that is not what an irregular heart rhythm is. Like, that's just like your heart beating faster or slower. If your heart actually like if the actual pattern of your heartbeat becomes irregular, no matter what the reason is, you have a heart condition. Like, that should not be happening. And so even if it only ever happens when you get like horny, you know what I mean? It's still bad. And you need a pacemaker. And I just think it's really funny that it's become like a staple in romance, where it's like, oh, her heartbeat became irregular because she was like getting horny, basically. And it's like, it shouldn't be. Kind of feels like every romance heroine maybe needs a pacemaker. That's all I'm saying. So say the heartbeat sped up or that it slowed down, not that it became irregular, because irregular means something different. Irregular means something unhealthy, okay? It is kind of fun though that in this book, we watch as Edward kind of figures out that when Bella has this sort of reaction, when her heart rate speeds up, I assume, doesn't actually like skip a beat or beat irregularly, that at first he thinks that he's like scaring her. And so every time she has that reaction, he has this like, oh my God, what did I say to frighten her? Is this the moment she's actually gonna realize I'm dangerous and leave me and all that? And then eventually he realizes that it's not actually fear, it's desire. And I also think that's a really fun, I don't want to say Easter egg, 'cause it's not really like an Easter egg, but it's just a fun detail from Stephenie Meyer's perspective, because it is true that fear and excitement elicit the same kind of physiological response in the body. And so she plays off of that by basically making it so that when she gets excited, he thinks that she's fearful at first and then eventually realizes that all of these things that he's noticing are also signs that she's getting horned up, and is like, wait a minute, she thinks I'm cute. And then they go to the restaurant. Now the restaurant, I don't know, nothing really stuck out to me from the scene, to be honest. It's kind of fun that like he doesn't really notice, like he's so used to the human beings around him reacting in a certain way to him that he doesn't notice that the waitress is interested in him. And it's when Bella kind of points it out that he's like, wait, really? And this conversation between them is kind of what makes him realize that her reaction to him is desire, not fear. But other than that, like nothing really sticks out to me from like this scene. Then they're driving home, and this is where Bella actually says out loud that he's a vampire. And he's just continuously very surprised that she's not that like freaked out by what he's telling her. And I have very interesting thoughts about this. I think that this works canonically strictly because she's a teenager. The older I get, the more I realize that teenagers are just large children. And I kind of get why there's like this gag about adults being scared of teenagers, because they are like kind of scary. Like imagine if a 10-year-old was like 6 feet tall, and that's what a 16-year-old is. So it is a pretty scary thing, actually. But as a result, like when you're a kid, there is just kind of this like acceptance of the world around you and this acceptance of what adults tell you, and the belief that vampires actually exist, or really any mythological creature, is very common amongst children, right? And then as you get older, you learn more about the world, and you learn that that kind of stuff, at least as far as we're aware, does not exist. But Bella is still in this like adolescent childhood sort of time in her life, right? Like she's not an adult yet, and her brain is not fully formed. So there is kind of this like taking in stride of the fact that these mythological creatures exist for her that I feel like wouldn't have happened if she was an adult. That doesn't necessarily mean that she wouldn't have still fallen for him and accepted it eventually, but Edward keeps remarking how much she just like doesn't seem to be that freaked out by the fact that there's this whole underworld of like mythological creatures that she's like finding out exists, and that he's one of them, and that they can just like be walking around and interacting with humans. And she just completely takes that in stride and is like, yep, that's fine. And I feel like that works because of her age. I feel like if these characters were older, then there would realistically be a little bit more of like a, wait, what? No, vampires aren't real. That would be crazy sort of reaction. Then the next day when Edward picks up Bella for school, she's wearing an unflattering sweater. Sorry, it's just really, really funny to me because he like specifically notices that her outfit is really ugly. And then he's like, thank God, because like she's so beautiful and she's so attractive. And if she was wearing a flattering sweater, I would have been distracted all day by her body. So thank God she's wearing this like giant garbage bag of a sweater that looks awful on her so that I'm not horned up the entire day. And I think that's hysterical. I think it's amazing. I don't want to get a boner in the middle of biology, so thank God she's wearing this like garbage bag. It's so funny. Also, we find out that he has Carlisle. So of the guys that attacked Bella, there was one that really was the driver of the interaction and had done this a bunch of times to other women, whereas the other guys involved in the whole thing, at least according to Edward's internal monologue, maybe even in the moment didn't realize how far the one guy was gonna take it, and we're just kind of like going along with it and like messing with her. But that guy had done stuff in the past to other women, and so Edward has Carlisle go to Port Angeles and like knock the guy out and then take him to another state and like where he had committed some of those crimes and like drop him off somewhere with like evidence that he had done it. I don't exactly understand like how they did whatever, but they end up having him arrested basically for his crimes. So he is off the streets, even if Edward doesn't like kill him. And those are the details that are fun about this book. Like those are the little tidbits of information that we get. Like, of course he had the guy arrested because he can't just be on the street after all of his crimes, even if Edward doesn't go and rip his head off like we all wanted him to, you know? So then Edward and Bella show up to school together. Now, in the book, this isn't viewed as like that big a deal. I don't specifically remember noticing when I was reading it that the student body was like freaking out, just Jessica, because Jessica has Bella's jacket. So when they're walking up to her and she's like holding Bella's jacket to give it back to her, she definitely in her mind is like, oh my God, he drove her to school. I mean, I know he dropped her off at the restaurant last night, but he drove her to school. I wonder if they, you know, had a sleepover, and wants to like interrogate her about it, right? But in the movie, this scene is really funny because everybody's like staring at them and Edward's got sunglasses on. It also just canonically doesn't make any sense though. I feel like the way it plays out in the book makes so much more sense because the Cullens are kind of outcasts. Like, yes, they're really beautiful, but they're also like kind of weird. I mean, they're all dating their siblings. Jessica in the movie has like the most real reaction to the Cullens of anybody. Like when she has the moment where she's like, they're all like together. I'm like, yeah, that's how I would talk about it too. I'd be like, oh my God, they're all like, it's like incest over there. Like, I don't know what's going on. It's like an incest cult. It's like really weird. So I feel like him and Bella dating would be a big deal more because like maybe people think it's weird. Like, oh my God, he's dating somebody not in the family. Crazy. But I don't think people would think it was like cool. So I think in the book, it makes a lot more sense. I mean, obviously Jessica thinks it's cool because she thinks he's really hot. But in the movie where they have him walk up with the sunglasses, I'm just always like, I don't think that's how that would go down. I don't think people would think he was like cool or whatever. But then he watches the conversation that Bella has with Jessica about her night with Edward through Jessica's eyes. And this is again, just a fascinating window into Edward's mind reading powers and the way he interacts with the world. It's just a very fun angle to view like a conversation that we got in that first book. Like we watched that conversation happen between Jessica and Bella, obviously, right? But then to watch it through Edward's eyes and see his thoughts on it while they're having it. Rosalie is really upset that Bella knows about their vampireness now. And I have like such mixed thoughts about this because honestly, I feel like Rosalie has the only like realistic reaction from like the rest of the Cullens are just like, okay, I guess Edward's in love with a human. I guess Edward's in love with the food that we eat. I think that's fine. That's fine. That's great. I'm really happy for him. It's going to turn out fine. And Rosalie's the only one that's like, he's putting us all in danger. He's making stupid decisions. He's going to expose us. And one of the thoughts that I was continuously having through this book is she really frames Rosalie out to be such a bitch. And Edward like hates her through a lot of the book because of how unsupportive she is of Bella and his relationship with Bella. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, I low-key agree with Rosalie. And throughout the 4 books, like the family is at risk at many points because of this human girl. So I completely understand why Rosalie's like, dude, just go date another vampire. What is going on? Justice for Rosalie. That's my queen. She was right. Her feelings are valid. Just because it worked out in the end doesn't mean that her fears were misplaced. It is really interesting, like through this whole section of them like interacting and getting to know each other better now that Bella knows that he's a vampire, the comparison between the original book and how much Bella enjoys these conversations with Edward versus those conversations from Edward's perspective and how afraid he is that at some point he's going to say something that's going to be like the thing that freaks her out, and then she's going to run screaming and she's going to have no interest in him and he's going to lose her, and he's like all worried about that, right? That is sort of the explanation that Stephanie Meyer gives us as to why he is so moody in those conversations where he's kind of like flip-flopping, and occasionally Bella will say something and it'll make him get like really dark and broody and kind of upset. The criticism that a lot of people have for him about being somewhat emotionally manipulative and just having these like giant mood swings, when we see it through his eyes, it makes sense as to why he's having the mood swings, but it doesn't justify the behavior. And I will again go back to what I said at the beginning about justice for Midnight Sun and justice for Stephanie Meyer. I actually really appreciate the fact that she just fully embraced how insane Edward is and was like, yeah, he's crazy. I'm not backing down from anything I put in the original book. He's insane. He's a bit of an emotional manipulator. That's how I wrote him the first time, and that's how I'm keeping him in this book. No retconning for me. It doesn't justify his behavior. And he even has a thought, I think at some point, that's like, he feels bad for how like moody he's being around her, and he like almost in a way kind of recognizes it. And that feels like the only olive branch that Stephanie Meyer extends, where she's like, yeah, okay, fine, this behavior isn't necessarily the best, but he's a 17-year-old boy that's been 17 for 100 years, and he hasn't felt any lust in any of that time, and now he fell in love with a human. It's not good, it's not okay for him to be treating her like this, but I think it makes sense for the character. It makes sense when you read his thought process, and he's going through it. Leave my man alone. I'm so glad that the room I'm sleeping in doesn't have one of those. I would totally wake up at 3 a.m. and be like, I can't believe she hasn't turned it around to the wall. Marissa, you're crazy. There's a random part, I'm page 300. Hang on. I can't believe we're only on page 300. Where Bella makes a comment that bears aren't in season because him and Emmett are about to go hunting for some bears. There is no way that Bella knows the local hunting laws. There is no way that she knows what animals are in season. I just don't believe it. No, she doesn't work at Mike's parents' shop until New Moon, I'm pretty sure. So I don't think she's working at the outdoorsy shop, whatever that's called, yet. So she would not know the hunting laws. Unrealistic. There is a very fun scene over the course of these like next few chapters where Edward is very grateful for Angela and her kindness to Bella, and he wants to do something nice for her as like a thank you, because the inside of her brain is just like very kind, and he loves like watching Bella's day through Angela's eyes, because Angela is just such a nice person, as opposed to like Jessica, who's not maybe the nicest, and Mike, who has a fat crush on Bella. And every time he like has these thoughts about Bella, it makes Edward like really jealous and really angry. And also it's heavily implied that at points Mike is like thinking about sex with Bella, and Edward can just like see that. Now, the amount that he probably has to put up with that because he's just like in a high school, so he's reading a bunch of high schoolers' minds all day, like, it is kind of funny to think about like the amount that he's been subjected to like other people's horny thoughts, but it's heavily implied that Mike has those thoughts. So he really wants to do something nice for Angela, and he knows that Angela has this crush on Ben, and he also knows that Ben likes Angela back, but he says that they're both like resistant to confessing their feelings for like basically the same reason. We don't know what that reason is, but he decides to hatch a ploy to get Ben to ask Angela out. And so he asks Emmett to like play along in a conversation with him, and then he, right in front of Ben, like sitting in front of him in class, has a whole fake conversation with Emmett where he claims that he asked Angela out and that she said no because she likes some guy named Ben. And then he's like, have you heard of this Ben kid? And Emmett's like, no, I have no idea who Ben is. That's so crazy that she said that. And then Ben thinks to himself like, oh my gosh, she likes me. I should totally ask her out. And you know what? Who cares if I'm shorter than her? We'll make it work. It'll be great. And then he goes and he asks Angela out, and that's how Angela and Ben end up together. This is so funny to me. It's just such a cute little touch. I'm so happy she included this scene. It's so goofy. It's so silly. And it's so like, it's so stupid too, because like in reality, at some point, Ben might ask Angela about Edward Cullen asking her out, and she would be like, what are you talking about? So that might be kind of a weird moment. And then also, they live in a really small town and the school is really, really small. So the implication that they're both sitting there in the same year as Ben, right in front of him in class being like, do you know who this fucking Ben guy is really funny, because it's like in reality, there is no way in hell anybody in this town doesn't know who anybody else is. But the Cullens are kind of outcasts. So I guess like there is the possibility that Ben believes that specifically the Cullens don't know who he is, but then they just happen to be having this conversation literally sitting directly in front of him in class. It's really goofy. It's very funny. I really like the goofy lore drop here where it's just like, and it turns out Edward's responsible for Ben and Angela, the really cute side couple in this book. I just thought it was fun. Then Edward has a bit of a full confrontation with Rosalie, where we find out the real reason why Rosalie doesn't like Bella is because Bella is a human and Rosalie wants to be human, and she's jealous of the fact that Bella is thinking about throwing her humanity away to be with Edward. Again, justice for Rosalie. This is so dumb. Like, Rosalie's feelings about this whole thing are valid. She doesn't have to have some kind of like vapid vein, like I'm jealous of her reasoning behind her behavior. Like, you are correct, Queen. You are correct in that this is a bad idea. You are correct in that it is crazy that Edward cannot let his obsession with this human girl go. Your feelings are valid. I do not understand why Stephenie Meyer like gave her this like other justification for her feelings and made it into this like, oh, see, look how bad a person Rosalie is. That it's like she's jealous and so she's acting on that jealousy. She wants to be human and Bella's human, so that's why she doesn't like her. And it's not that it actually is ridiculous that Edward is dating a human. Oh my God, justice for Rosalie. She was so mistreated in this book. She was so mistreated in this series. She was right, okay? Then we reach a part where in the original book, Edward is just kind of asking Bella a lot of questions about herself, and from Bella's perspective, we just kind of skip over it. And she's like, yeah, he wants to know the minutia of everything about my life. He's asking me like a million questions. It's really weird. I don't get why he cares about all these like little details, but he does. But we actually see some of those details in the book. You know, I've spoken a few times in the series about how Stephenie Meyer is actually from Arizona, and so am I. And she made Bella from Phoenix. And so there's a part in this book where Bella is like describing her favorite things about Arizona,
Arizona and Phoenix. It was just kind of really sweet to read someone feeling so positively about Arizona, because it's certainly not perfect, but no place is. And I love my home and I feel very positively for it. And so it was very fun to read a scene where somebody else who also clearly feels very positively towards the city is like describing it in a sweet way. But there was like a whole section that I'm now having trouble finding for some reason, where Bella like talks about her favorite things to do. I wanted to like read the actual line, but I can't find it. But she says something about the wild horses down by the Salt River. Tiny Arizona lore drop. Those are not actually wild horses. They're just like somebody's horses that got out at some point. We don't have native wild horses in Arizona. But I don't fault Stephenie Meyer for thinking they're wild horses, because everybody thinks they're wild horses, myself included. All of that being said, as much as I enjoyed these little like Arizona shout outs, this book is long enough, babe. I don't know that we needed a whole entire chapter of Bella talking about how much she loves Phoenix. But like, I appreciated it because I also love Phoenix. At some point in their days together at school, they plan to go to the Meadow. You know the Meadow. You're familiar with the Meadow? And Alice tries to like pull Edward aside and have a conversation with him at some point, and he's a little bit irritated. He doesn't really like want to talk to her, but she's adamant, and he's like, okay, fine, we'll go, we'll have a conversation, and then Bella and I will go to the Meadow on Saturday and it's gonna be fine. And when he meets with Alice, we get what is one of the most fascinating scenes in this entire book from a vampire lore perspective, because Edward can read minds, right? So he can see what's within Alice's mind. So he himself cannot see the future, but he actually gets to see the visions that Bella has, as opposed to all of the other Cullens who have to wait for her to like tell them about it, right? And so they're standing there and she's kind of showing him this knot, this like web of possibilities. And she's talking about the probability that Bella survives the Meadow, and basically at the time that they're having this conversation, there is like a 50-50 chance that he kills her. But if he doesn't kill her, then it's almost 100% guaranteed that eventually she will become a vampire. And so Alice is showing him like, these are the two options. She either dies at the Meadow or shortly thereafter, or she becomes a vampire someday. Edward's very upset about this because he wants her to stay human. He doesn't want to like turn her into a vampire. We know that about him. So he's very upset about the fact that she doesn't really see a possibility of that happening, because we're looking at like the probabilities of everything that's maybe gonna go down. And he sees there's like this one like really slim chance that that's what ends up happening. Now, the thing that confuses me about this though, is that I have not decided if I think this is a break in continuity or not, because canonically Alice sees visions based off of people's decisions. So the visions change as people's decisions change. Like, she doesn't concretely see what's going to happen. She sees essentially what the possibility of the future is based off of what's happening now. So it kind of feels like Stephenie Meyer is trying to establish that Alice's visions are usually whatever the highest probability outcome is. That doesn't mean that's actually what's going to happen. It's just like, with how everybody's thinking right now, this is the path that has the most likelihood, almost. But it just feels like there's been so many points through the book series where Alice has had these visions, and it's like she has the one vision, and it's like, this is what I can see, and this is what's gonna happen based off of how everybody feels right now. But then we get this scene where apparently we can see like all of these potential futures based off of all of these little nuanced things. And she claims that the reasoning for this is because A, Edward isn't really decided. He says he's decided, but she's like, you're not really. You have not fully decided if you're gonna kill her or not. And so that's why I can see both these potential futures. I think I'm talking myself now into believing that this is not a continuity break, because I think that then all the points where Alice says, I don't know, they're not decided in the future, like in the book series, when they're like, Alice, what's gonna happen? And she's like, I don't know. I can't see like well enough. Maybe this is what's actually happening in her mind. Maybe when there is a situation where somebody's like kind of undecided or things are shifting a lot, this is how she views it, is like this giant web of potential timelines. And like, that's why like she just simply says like, I don't know, because it's like, well, I'm seeing some of this, I'm seeing some of that, but I don't exactly know what's gonna happen because they're not 100% decided yet. Maybe that's why that is. It's such a fascinating scene. It's one of the coolest ones in the book. It also just gives us so much more context. Like, at this point in time, Bella is so in love with Edward, and she's just so trusting of him, and she's so excited to see whatever he wants to show her in the Meadow. And she's just like, I trust him, he's not gonna hurt me, whatever. And it turns out from his perspective, it's like, well, I don't know. He hasn't fully decided whether or not he's gonna like drink your blood yet. So then he goes to pick Bella up,
And I just want to note that like it is mentioned in the first book that they kind of match. Like they accidentally almost wore the same outfit. But I don't know how I didn't catch even in the reread of the first book, but caught here now in my read of Midnight Sun, because Edward makes such a big deal out of picking out the shirt out of his closet, that what they're both wearing are sleeveless white button-ups. Let me say that again, sleeveless white button-up. Now, no offense if you have a shirt like this, I have never seen one with my own two eyes. So I feel like I can kind of make fun of this. A button-up shirt with like a collar, but then like no sleeves. Have you guys ever seen that before? Am I just like dumb? Have I just like never seen that before? I don't know. I feel like short sleeve button-up would be a lot less ridiculous looking, but whatever. They're in matching outfits, and the matching outfits are sleeveless button-ups. And again, through this whole like trip to the meadow and everything from Edward's perspective, the big takeaway that I have and the big note is just how crazy it is that in the original book, this is all just like so romantic and so cutesy, and Bella's like, oh my god, I'm so in love with him, and why does he keep getting so moody? And like, I think he's really cool, but I must not be like good enough for him because he keeps just like flip-flopping back and forth, and I keep like pissing him off on accident. And that's why, like I said, it's just kind of like, ooh, emotional manipulation, not great. But when you watch it from his perspective, it's because he's like terrified that he's gonna kill her. And like I said, he's like not 100% fully decided, apparently. By the time they actually go to the meadow, I feel like the probability was somewhere around like 70 or 80% that she was gonna survive. But there was still like a 30% chance that she was gonna die. And I don't know about you, but I would not take those odds. Like if somebody said to me, you can go do this fun activity, but there's a 30% chance you die, I would not do it. I mean, I know cave divers exist, so there are people out there who would, but I think they're crazy. I think cave divers are the craziest people on planet Earth. And I personally, if I knew that there was a 30% chance that a man would kill me if I went into the woods with him, would not do it. But Bella didn't know that, so. But he tries to tell her. He keeps saying like, I'm a danger to you. And Bella's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. I trust you. And then you're in his mind and you're like, oh, he is a danger to her. And this scene, oh my god, the meadow scene is insane. Insane from Edward's perspective. He's like counting the bugs in the area. And I understand that he's like trying not to drink her blood. He's like alone with her, they're in the wilderness, and he's like fighting the urge to drink her blood. And I did really appreciate the parts where he's actually having kind of the emotional journey and the breakthrough where he's like, no, I do love her. I can't live life without her. And like the basically post the meadow scene, he has a way easier time being around her and like not being tempted to drink her blood, and kind of almost even forgets thinking about it. But in the scene, there are just all these like really weird points, like the part where he's like laying there and she's kind of like tracing her fingers. Like I said, he's like counting the bugs and stuff like that and doing all this stuff with his mind. And it's kind of framed as like him trying to like distract himself and keep himself super occupied so that he's like not thinking about her blood and stuff. But again, it's just like really funny because the scene from her perspective is supposed to be this like super romantic, like their time together sort of thing. And then in his head, he's like, and there's 3,475 ants nearby, at least 4 bees flying through the air. And is that a beetle? And you're just like, okay, like, I guess they didn't have the same experience. Like from her perspective, she's like, oh my god, look at my like hot vampire boyfriend. He's like sparkling. And he's like, I want to drink her blood so bad that I just immediately and carnally need to know how many ants are in the vicinity. As long as I know how many bees are in the area, I'm positive I'm not going to kill her. And again, I am left to wonder, how much of this did Stephenie Meyer know? Like, how much did she know when she wrote the original scene, and how much did she add? If I had to guess, if I had to just speculate, I would guess that she probably was aware of the fact that Edward was really, really fighting the urge to kill her, and that at some point in the meadow, he managed to like put that part of himself away and move forward from the meadow, able to be in a full relationship with her, where he's not as worried about killing her all the time. I would imagine that she did know that, but maybe like the nitty-gritty of it she didn't know. And I really, really want to know the reasoning behind the whole bug thing. In this scene, we also get one of my favorite random lore drops about the vampires, which is that thirst feels slightly different to all of them. So I'm just gonna read you the passage. How I interpreted thirst wasn't even exactly the way the rest of my family did. To me, the thirst was a fire burning. Jasper described it as a burning too, but to him it was like an acid rather than flame, chemical and saturating. Rosalie thought of it as profound dryness, a screaming lack rather than an outside force. Emmett tended to evaluate his thirst in the same way. I suppose that was natural, as Rosalie had been the first and most frequent influence in his second life. So I knew of the times that others had had difficulty resisting and when they had not been able to resist, but I couldn't know exactly how potent their temptation had been. I can make an educated guess, however, based on their standard level of control. It was an imperfect technique, but I thought it should answer her curiosity. That's really cool. I just think that's like a fun little tidbit. Like, not all the vampires interpret their thirst in the same way. I think I've always just kind of thought about the feeling of thirst for them being the same as the feeling of extreme thirst for me, like when I get really thirsty for water, you know? And that's kind of how Edward describes his thirst, right? I guess it's not like that for all the vampires. I guess they all kind of have their own like personal sort of feeling that comes along with thirst, which I think is just like really cool. It's a fun little touch. Edward is able to resist the temptation to kill her, and by the time they leave the meadow, the probability is astronomical that he is not going to kill her, and instead she is going to end up becoming a vampire someday. But like I said, he has that like golden path where she could potentially stay human, but it's incredibly unlikely, but that's kind of like what he's holding on to. But the thing that I want to note about this scene, the last thing I'm going to say about the meadow, is that this scene is so insanely long in Midnight Sun, and it is long in the original book as well, and that makes sense because the meadow scene is actually the dream that Stephenie Meyer had. If you're not aware of this, Stephenie Meyer got the idea for Twilight because she had a dream about Bella and Edward being in the meadow and him being all sparkly and stuff, and she was just fascinated by this whole thing, and she basically wrote this whole book, wrote the meadow scene, then she went back to the beginning and wrote them getting to the meadow, and then she wrote to the end. So the meadow is the most important scene to Stephenie Meyer because that's the original dream that she had. So it makes sense that in both books it is such a dominant scene. However, in the original Twilight, it's only, hang on, let me find it. Okay, so they start hiking on page 209 in the original book, and then they leave, like basically they get back to the car and leave on page 233. So it is 233 minus 209. Hang on, I can do this math live, it's fine. 24 pages total, right? Yep. Now let's look at this one. Okay, so on page 415 is when they like get to the trail and start having the conversation about hiking. And they get back to the car on page 473. It's 415 to 473. God, now I have to do this again. Oh wait, 50, 48. Oh my God. So it literally is exactly double the length. So the scene in the original book is 24 pages, and in this book it's 48 pages. That's crazy, if I did my math correct. Honestly, this kind of tracks. This book is exactly double as long, as we've already talked about, as the original Twilight book. So the original is like 400 pages, and this book is like 800. And I'm not even that upset about it, honestly. Some people have complained about how thick this book is, but I don't know. I'm a giant Twilight fan. Obviously, I'm like at the Twilight house right now, so more Twilight is not something that's ever gonna bother me, and I don't feel like any of it was wasted pages. I know a lot of people feel like Edward's internal monologue is very repetitive. I'll be honest with you, I felt that way the first time I read it, and then upon the reread, I did not really feel that way at all, and I don't know what changed. Like, I read it in 2020 before I had a YouTube channel, before I like analyzed books really at all, and I just kind of like read them for fun. And I remember thinking that I felt his monologue was really repetitive, but this time around reading it, for some reason, it didn't end up bothering me, and I did enjoy the reread a lot. So I don't know, but that's why it's so much longer. And I feel like the meadow scene really shows that because we get just so much like extra Edward internal monologue that we just don't get in the original book. Bella just doesn't think as much as Edward does. So then we have the scene where like Edward is driving Bella back to the Swans, and they're talking about potentially introducing him to Charlie, but then when they get there, Jacob and Billy are there. And this scene is like the peak of Edward doing this like distracted, where like he's having a conversation with Bella and he has like a whole in-depth thought process about like the history of one of his siblings or something, like while he's talking to her. We get an Emmett and Rosalie lore dump where we get kind of in-depth about Rosalie saving Emmett. We know actually from this conversation in the original book that Rosalie found Emmett when she was out and about and ran him back to Carlisle for him to be turned because Rosalie was worried she wouldn't have the strength and that if she bit him, she would just drink his blood. But there was something in his face, like she really wanted to save him.
and then they ended up being like romantically linked. We also know that Alice had seen the future of her and Jasper together, so she knew her and Jasper were going to end up together, but that she had to wait for Jasper to be ready for it, and then that she went and sought him out when he was ready, and then they went and sought out the Cullens together. So we knew all of that, but we just get to see it through Edward's perspective because he can read everybody's minds, so he can see their internal monologue. And this is what I was kind of saying in the beginning about not just getting Edward's perspective, but kind of getting every character's perspective because he can read everybody's minds. So he has a very like first person recollection of a lot of these things because he's read the minds of the people telling him the stories while they were telling it. I also think I skipped, like, I don't remember exactly when it happens, but there's some sort of part where we get like so much more information about Edward and his history with Carlisle and like leaving and having his little like Dexter moment and then coming back to Carlisle and all that. We get the in-depth about that at some point in this book too. And so the only like people that we don't really get a super in-depth on are Esme and Carlisle, which is kind of disappointing. Esme, I feel like Esme's is the least baked out of any of the Cullens. Like we get a little bit more information about her, but like not that much. And with Carlisle, like I would have loved to have gotten so much more of Carlisle's memories because he's just lived so much longer than any of the rest of them. He was born in the 1600s and Edward was born in 1901. And then all of the other Cullens were turned into vampires like since Edward was, you know? So Carlisle has 300 more years of life than any of the other Cullens. So why, well actually no, just kidding. Jasper wasn't turned by Carlisle and neither was Alice. So I don't know what year Alice was turned, but Jasper is older too. But anyway, I say all of that to say that I would have loved to have gotten more of Carlisle's history, even if we just got like a random pocket of it. But for some reason, Carlisle is the only Cullen that isn't like extended this. Edward partially remembers everything else because he was the earliest turned, like besides Carlisle, like he's the first one that Carlisle turned. So he was kind of there when everybody else joins the group. So he has all these in-depth thoughts about that whole thing, but he never really goes back and tells us about any of Carlisle's past. And that's just kind of frustrating. Even the part where he's like going through Carlisle's history and like talking about all the paintings, like it's also surface level. And we get like Carlisle getting turned in depth, and then he just kind of like goes through the paintings the same as in the original book, and we get like slightly more about each of those things. But I don't know. I would have liked more Carlisle. But because Billy and Jacob are at the house when they get back to the house, Edward cannot go inside with her, but he is, as always, just kind of like lurking on the exterior, reading people's minds, figuring out what's going on with Bella, even if he's not in the room with her. And he watches as she kind of steers Billy and Jacob away. And then he's like watching Charlie and Bella have dinner, and they have lasagna for dinner, like reheated lasagna, I'm pretty sure. And then milk, like they pour glasses of milk, or I think Edward like thinks they're milk. Wait a minute, am I like, hang on, I have to go find this scene because now I'm wondering, does he actually know for sure it's milk? He can't read Charlie's mind explicitly, like we've established. He can only read his emotions. So if I go to 509. So yeah, he says, microwave warring, liquid, too thick for water, I would guess milk, poured in the glasses. And I like reacted so strongly to this. I was like, milk and lasagna? That is the worst combination of things ever. But now that I'm talking about it, I don't know if I'm giving Stephenie Meyer too much credit. That maybe part of the point is like he realizes it's not water, but he's not human. So like he doesn't realize that like lasagna and milk would be a really weird combination. So maybe it's like beer. Maybe Charlie was having a beer or something, but he thinks it's milk. I don't know. But just when I was reading it, I was like, milk and lasagna? If that's actually like the combination they're having for dinner, oh God, like I can't, that's like making me sick. I like can't think about that. That's crazy. But maybe Edward's wrong. Maybe it was like beer or whatever. This scene where they're like in the bedroom after that and they're like cuddling and Bella's like asking him about sex and stuff. Same as I said when I read the original Twilight, way hornier than I remember it being from when I read it as a kid. And there's this line where he says like, what do you want to do then? And I just like, and what would you do if I was there? Haha. Like it just like feels like one of those texts, you know what I mean? It's just really funny. But again, like Edward and his internal monologue, like he wants Bella and Bella wants him. And he's like, oh my God, wait, we're laying in bed together. Like, of course she thinks that's where this is going. And then he has to break the news to her that they can't ever do that because he doesn't want to like break her in half, literally, not figuratively, you know what I mean? But we know they do eventually. and it leads to the production of a demon child. Now I'm confused because I have a note here that Rosalie explains that her disdain for Bella coming from wishing she could be human, but I have up here that they have a heart-to-heart. Oh, is it because of, wait a minute. Okay, don't kill me. When I was talking about Rosalie earlier, I don't know how much actually, they have like two sort of confrontation moments in this book, Edward and Rosalie, and now I cannot for the life of me remember if I was wrong in telling you that it was revealed before that she was jealous or if it gets revealed here later. I'm not 100% sure. But basically Edward goes back to the Cullen house because he wants to introduce Bella to the family. So he's like prepping the family for this. And at some point he talks to Rosalie. And my note says here that that's where she explains that her disdain is coming from being jealous. But she doesn't explain it as much as Edward reads it in her mind. And this is actually something that I think I like this aspect of Edward's character. Like his mind reading is obviously a huge violation of people's privacy. And it's not like he has control over it. Like, it's not his fault, but like he knows things about people that they probably wouldn't ever want anyone to know. And I'm sure we've all had that weird, anxious thought where we're like thinking about something really weird in public and then we're like, what if someone can read my mind? And they like know I'm thinking about this right now. And so Edward actually shows in this scene specifically how he like finds out, and again, I don't know if it's this scene or the earlier one, but now I feel like it's this scene where he like finds out that the reason behind Rosalie's disdain is because she's jealous of Bella and her humanity, but he never reveals that to the other Cullens, and actually very specifically doesn't say that to Emmett when Emmett says something to him about like, what's Rosalie's problem? I don't get it. And I think it shows that Edward at the very least tries his hardest to protect the privacy of others. Like if it's not something that they would want to share, then even though he knows it because he could read their mind, he tries not to share it. And I think that's actually kind of a nice aspect of his character. There's this part where Edward says, nothing besides blood seems to move through us at all, regarding just like he's thinking about vampires and their life and all of that. Carlisle had spent many years attempting to understand our immortal anatomy. It was a difficult task based mostly on assumption and observation. Vampire cadavers were not available for study. His best interpretation of our life systems was that our internal workings must be microscopically porous. Though we could swallow anything, only blood was accepted by our bodies. That blood was absorbed into our muscles and provided fuel. When the fuel was depleted, our thirst intensified to encourage us to replenish our supply. Nothing besides blood seemed to move through us at all. Now, here's the thing. I wrote in my notes that I feel like this contradicts interviews that Sarah J. Maas has done, where she explains that like the vampires have fluids such as like eye juice and saliva and things like that. That is part of how she like explains how Edward gets Bella pregnant, because per her own rules of her world, that kind of doesn't make sense. And so she's had to like retcon that a ton. And so at first when I read that, I was like, that feels like it contradicts what she said before. But then I'm like, but I don't know, because their whole point is that vampire cadavers aren't available for study. So maybe they're not even really aware of the fact that they have these other like juices in their body, know their eyes are wet. So then they would know, like obviously their eyes aren't just like covered in blood, like the whole eye. God, that would be terrifying. So like they know that that liquid's not blood. I don't know. It sort of felt to me when I read it like it contradicts interviews that she's given, but maybe not. I don't know. Maybe just because like they don't 100% understand. But his whole thing is that like basically they do use blood in their body. It's just like it isn't their blood. Like they drink other blood in order to like power their body, and then their body just like absorbs it and uses it for everything. And that's like the explanation of how the vampires work. Okay, so then they go to the Cullen house, and this is where we get the in-depth about Edward and his history, was when they're looking. That's why, okay, sorry, when I was talking about that a minute ago, I was like, I feel like we don't get that much extra about Carlisle when he's going over the paintings. Now I remember why. Because Edward's thinking about himself. Through this whole like trip to the Cullen house, we get a bunch of Edward's lore dumps. I would have loved some of Carlisle's. I won't repeat myself. I already talked about that, but I would have loved to get a little bit more. Like we got some, but I just think he's so interesting. I would love just like an in-depth book about Carlisle's history. Stephanie. But while we're getting this kind of internal recollection from Edward about his time hunting monsters, as he puts it, we do end up with this really interesting question of good and evil. And Edward himself is ending life, but the life that he's ending are people who hurt others. And so is that an ethical thing to do or not? Which is, you know, a very interesting moral question, and not one that can really be covered very easily in a few page span within a young adult romance novel about vampires. But she tries, and I appreciate that. And essentially Edward ends up deciding that taking a life is taking a life. And so it's weighing on him
to kill these people, even if in theory it's ethical to do. And I actually think that's a fairly okay and nuanced conclusion to come to. It's not necessarily that those people bring goodness to the world, right? Like maybe there are some people who truly almost exclusively bring harm to the world, but then if you're the one to take them out of the world, that's still something that would weigh on you because you're taking a life. Like I said, it's not exactly a subject that's super easily covered in such a short period of time with such a restrictive canvas, you know? But I feel like she did her best, and it was kind of like an interesting take from her. At least I feel like I understand what she thinks about that. Then they go play baseball, and this is yet again one of those things where, like, did we need this? No. Did I love it? Maybe. We get a bit of an in-depth description of the game itself. So remember, from Bella's perspective, she's just watching them play baseball and she's like, whoa, they're all moving so fast. The bases are so far apart. She's just like amazed by how impressive all of it is, but she doesn't notice things super specifically. Whereas from Edward's perspective, we get an in-depth description of exactly how the game goes down. Like, you know how many points each team has when James shows up. And so that's what I'm saying. It's just like really funny because it's like, of course, this book is like a year long. It's such a long book. And it's because of scenes like this and how much in-depth description we got. But this book is objectively fan service, you guys. Like, she wrote it for the fans. It wasn't a necessary addition to the series. It's for people who are insane about Twilight, I think. And so for me, it's like, I really enjoyed this scene because I think it was really fun to know exactly how the game went down and to watch the in-depth mechanics of vampires playing baseball, especially because the baseball scene is such an iconic scene from the original movie. But I can completely understand why, if somebody picked this up that wasn't a massive fan of Twilight, why they would be like, why on earth am I getting play-by-play coverage of a vampire baseball game? Might as well be watching the broadcast, you know what I mean? Then James shows up and we get one of the only moments in this book that I actually feel like Stephenie Meyer did some retconning. And again, I'd like to reiterate that I actually appreciate the fact that she resisted the urge to retcon a bunch of the stuff that people criticized about the original book and was like, you know what? I stand by all my choices. I stand by everything I did, except for this. So one of the criticisms of the original book that I don't think I ever talked about because I don't really care, I just kind of chalked it up to like, it's the genre, it's a young adult vampire romance, and like sometimes things need to be slightly convenient for the narrative. But when James and Victoria and Laurent show up to the baseball field, in the beginning, they don't realize Bella is there. They don't realize that there's a human with them until the wind shifts. When the wind shifts, they're able to smell her blood, and that's when they all realize that they have a human with them. And a lot of people have pointed out that with how intense and insane the vampire senses are, the odds that they wouldn't be able to smell her blood when they're standing like 10, 20 feet away are very slim, even if the wind is going in the other direction. And they would have been able to hear her heartbeat. They would have been able to see that her skin didn't quite look like theirs. And also, Edward tells her to take her hair down, but then there's points where he remarks, like smelling into her hair, that it's so intense with like her scent that a lot of people are like, why would taking her hair down help? I feel like that would make the scent stronger based off of other things that Edward had said. So to fix all of this, Stephenie Meyer adds that our main man, Jasper, he's not our main man, but you know what I mean, that Jasper is using his emotional manipulation ability to somehow make it so that Edward and Bella are very uninteresting to look at. I don't know how to describe this super accurately because like it sort of doesn't make sense within the bounds of Jasper's powers, but basically he's using his capacity for emotional manipulation to make it so that like when James and Victoria and Laurent look over at like Bella and Edward and Jasper, that the three of them are that they immediately become very bored, like overwhelmingly bored, and like just don't want to look in that area. And then when they look at Emmett, he makes Emmett very, very scary looking to them. And again, it's like very abstract within the bounds of his powers, but the way that I interpreted it is that he's like controlling the emotions of them as they're looking at the Cullens. If they look over here, he makes them really bored. And then if they look over here, he makes them scared, if that makes sense. Sure, fine. I mean, does it make sense for Jasper's powers? It's like as though Jasper is controlling the actual like vibe of those areas instead, which kind of doesn't make sense, but I don't know. It feels like this is something that she kind of played with in the novella that she wrote, the Brie Tanner one, where there's a guy in that
book named Frank, who is able to like makes himself so like repulsive or something, so like people can't like look at him directly. And I gotta be honest with you, I read that book so long ago now. It's been so many months that I don't quite remember what his actual power is that made him able to do that. But she did that in the Bree Tanner novella. And so it feels like she kind of pulled from that idea and made it so that Jasper did the same thing, so that they were just like very uninterested by Bella. And then as far as hearing her heartbeat goes, she makes it so that Edward is like tapping his foot to her heartbeat, so that they think that the sound is coming from the tapping of his foot and not from her heart. Doesn't make sense. The combination of him tapping his foot and Jasper making them super uninteresting, I guess explains why they didn't realize she was human until the wind changes. I still think they would have been able to smell her blood. And I'm just a little bit like, I don't know. It is cool. Like, what she does with Jasper here in this next little bit, Edward is very impressed by his like war sort of mode, right? Because they've only been with Jasper in times of peace, but Jasper had a whole like era of his vampire life where it was all about like vampire war. And so there's even a point where they're like driving where he's really like battle focusing them. That's like way later. It is really interesting what she does with Jasper in this. However, there's part of me that is a little bit disappointed because, like I said, one of the biggest things that I enjoyed about this book is that everybody was like, I hope she fixes this. I hope she fixes that. I hope she gives us like a reason why Edward was so like weird and crazy about Bella. And she was just like, eh. Edward's weird and crazy. Everything I put in the original book is still true. I'm not retconning anything. I'm not changing anything. Fuck you, bitches. And then in this part specifically, she's like, but I guess, like, you guys are kind of right that it doesn't make sense that they didn't realize she was human. And so here's a reason why maybe they didn't realize she was human. I guess I'll give you that. And so it just kind of like made me giggle, but at the same time made me kind of disappointed. Stick to your guns, Stephanie. That's one of the best things about this book. And then it's so funny because I'm looking at my notes here. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this little section, yesterday we filmed Marissa's drunk retelling of the original movie. So she was talking about the movie, but we filmed it right here. It's kind of almost exactly the same angle. Sorry about that. It's just a really good angle of the room and it has Edward in the background. But she went, like, she basically skipped the whole entire part with James because she's like, I find it so boring. I find it so uninteresting. I like everything else. And I did not like realize, I guess, until she said that I very much feel the same way. And the only notes that I really have from this section of what I think are cool is that I do actually really like the in-depth description of Edward hunting through Canada for James. Like, they're chasing him, right? So they trick James into thinking they have Bella with them. They is Emmett, Edward, and Carlisle. So the three of them are out hunting James. So they trick James into thinking they have Bella with them. And then at one point they turn on him and start chasing him. And so he realizes obviously that they don't have Bella. So now they're tracking him. And we get this really, really fascinating chain of events where they're following his trail, right? And they're a little bit faster than him. So they are gaining on him over time, but it's taking like long stretches of time for them to gain any ground on him. And anytime he comes across a lake, he'll like dive into the lake and then come out the other side of the lake and run in a random direction. And it's established very quickly that vampires cannot follow trails through water. So he's like masking the trail by doing that. So the Cullens are getting around that by texting Alice, and all three of them will then just decide they're gonna go explore an area of like the bank of the lake looking for James's trail, and then she'll text them back which of them discovers the trail, so then they know the area that the trail is in, and so then they can go find it and chase him. And so they're kind of on this like repeated path of like stumbling across a lake, texting Alice, finding the trail, and then chasing it for a while, and then stumbling across a lake, and all this stuff. And it's so interesting to me to see how they all like use their powers. And again, I'm left to wonder like how much of this did Stephenie Meyer know already? Like, did she know that they were using Alice, or was it like, oh yeah, they're off hunting, I'm not thinking about that at all, I just have Bella and Alice and Jasper in the car together, and like that whole thing going down. And then eventually when she was writing all of this is when she came up with all this other stuff? I have no idea. So anyway, Then James ends up getting away from them. They're really worried about him swimming into the water, but then at one point they stumble across an airfield and they realize he actually got on a plane. And so then they definitely missed him because they can't track the scent through the air, obviously. And this is something they're pretty upset about. And then they go to Phoenix. Now, the scene of Edward getting to Bella in Phoenix is truly one of the most like crazy things. Like, it's so bizarre. And that's where I have to think that she hadn't thought about any of this before she went to write Midnight Sun. I don't know why she wrote it the way that she did, but I'm not sure that me recounting it to you is going to truly capture how bizarre all of it is. And so instead, I decided to show you.
I got your phone right here, man.
Why didn't you go after her?
The two of us weren't enough. She died.
What happened, Alice?
Stay with us, Edward. You're going to need us all.
Her mother?
I haven't seen her. She won't be in the room. He may have already.
There's no time for that, Alice. Do you know where we're going?
58th Street and Cactus. Whatever car we take, the police are going to be searching for its owners. So choose wisely.
What about that Subaru WRX STI?
Alice, give me 30 seconds ahead.
Okay.
We don't have the rights to that song. You have to use something royalty free.
Okay.
Jazz, I'm going to lose the side mirrors. Give me a view. Just the road, Alice.
Sorry. They're setting up the first roadblock and the second.
We're switching cars under the next overpass. Are you sure we had the right address?
Hey guys, I'm editing right now, and as much as I love that bit of me and my friends with the cars, and I'm keeping it in because it's so funny, you cannot at all actually tell plot point by plot point what happened. I did my best, okay? I worked with the tools that I had. I feel like it's really hard to make certain details of it clear. So just to clarify, they were at the airport. Edward can read Alice's mind, like, right when they land, and he's like, oh no, something's wrong, and Emmett kind of drags him over under the whole, like, phone thing. I was like, well, that's the intro line, but it doesn't make sense. So he drags him over, like, oh, I think I have your phone, like, explaining why he stopped almost, and then they have the whole conversation with Alice that you watched, but then they steal the one car, and that car has nitrous oxide in it for some reason. Like, they just happen to find a car that's, like, tricked out, got nitrous, so whatever. And then he breaks the side mirrors off of it at one point on a freeway overpass, but I did it with the Hot Wheels cars, who cares? But he breaks the side mirrors off, so he has Jasper and Emmett look out the windows so he can read their minds, so he can see behind him. So Alice is giving him 30 seconds ahead of what the road's gonna be, and then Jasper and Emmett are acting as his side mirrors, and he's reading everybody's minds and driving the car, and then they have to switch the cars because he realizes that there's, like, no other way because the police are, like, putting up roadblocks to, like, catch them. And so they switch the cars, and Carlisle, like, injects the driver of the other car with something and, like, knocks her out, and then they flip the car. And then they flip the car they were driving into traffic, which I will talk about in a second. in our little outro there, but they flip a car into traffic and then drive the new car the rest of the way to Bella. It was difficult to portray all of that, and so hopefully that helps clarify what all of that was. Please feel free to go rewatch it and appreciate my artistic genius.
So that's the car chase scene. The audio is probably really echoing here. I'm sorry, but I could not resist the urge to film a little bit in Bella's shower. So their actions led to a 27 car pileup on the 101. Now here's the thing that bothers me about this. Not only their just utter disdain for human life in this, I mean, they mention in passing that they knew that nobody was gonna die, minor injuries only, but I feel like a 27 car pileup on the freeway would not only lead to minor injuries, but not only that, they would not have taken the 101 from the airport. Part of what I have enjoyed about this book up to now is Stephenie Meyer's accuracy when it comes to depicting Phoenix and talking about Phoenix. She's from here, and so her depictions of Phoenix are very accurate. And when I was reading the scene of them driving from the airport to the dance studio, it all tracked. They go from the freeway to this exit that can split. One lane goes onto the 51 and 2 lanes go onto the 202. The 51 goes north, right? It describes how that goes down to 1 lane and they have to scoot by the traffic because it's kind of backed up. That's when they lose the side mirrors, is when they're going from the airport to the 51. And not only that, but they describe making the car switch under an overpass. Now, obviously I could not film on an actual freeway, so in our shot, we're just like in the parking lot. So we're not under an overpass, but the line is we're switching under the next overpass and then they switch in the overpass. So in theory, they could have taken the 202 to the 101 from the airport and have been on the 101, but there are no overpasses on the 101 from the 202 to Cactus Road. Actually, shit, is there one right before you get, what is that? Is that the Thunderbird exit? There might be one, but per my memory, I am pretty sure that that stretch of the 101 goes over the surface streets, not under them. But the 51 goes under all the surface streets. So if they're gonna switch the cars under an overpass, then there has to be an overpass on the freeway for them to switch the cars under. So both the fact that they said that the exit is 1 lane, and it's 1 lane to the 51, it's 2 lanes to the 202, and canonically they get off on Cactus and they take Cactus all the way down. You can get off the 101 on Cactus, but that wouldn't be the most efficient route to the dance studio. If you actually took the 101, you would take the 101 all the way up and around and then you would come down. So they wouldn't actually have driven on Cactus, they would have driven on some other road. I didn't actually look up the maps, I don't have it memorized. And then they would have turned on Cactus, like when they got there. Instead, they get off the freeway on Cactus and they take Cactus all the way down. So all of this implies that the route that they take is to go from the airport, take the 51 all the way, get off on Cactus, and then take Cactus all the way down to the dance studio. But then it's casually mentioned that they caused a 27 car pileup on the 101. How? How did they cause a pileup on the 101? I even thought to myself, I was like, maybe they took the 51 to the 101 and then came down. Maybe the traffic called for that. But even then, they wouldn't have driven on Cactus. So the whole route that she described makes sense. Like, she actually tracked a route from the airport to the dance studio and it was accurate and it totally would have worked. And then she just blows it out of the water by randomly mentioning that they caused a 27 car pileup on the 101. How? They never drove on the 101. Now, the excuse that I have for Stephenie Meyer is that there is a 27 car pileup on the 101 once a day. That is like the most dangerous freeway in the city by like a mile, and there's an accident there literally every single day. So it's not insane that when she thought, oh, intense freeway accident, she thought 101, especially 101 North. But it was just so disappointing because she was so accurate with everything else that she talked about the city of Phoenix. And then she did that and I was like, it wouldn't be the 101, it would be the 51. And then I've tried so hard to figure out how they would have driven on the 101 on their route. And the only way they could have done it is to go from the freeway onto the 202, then onto the 101. Then maybe there is an overpass between then and when you get off on Cactus, and then they would have taken Cactus all the way over to 58th. There's just no way that's more efficient. That's all I'm saying. I don't have like that much more to talk about with the rest of the book. It's just kind of like the end. We get a little bit more of Alice's backstory, and that's where I already kind of mentioned that I have this theory that, you know, she's talked about wanting to write 2 other books. I think one of them might be an Alice backstory, which I think would be really cool, like a prequel for Alice. And so we get a little bit more of Alice's backstory, and we find out that James was actually hunting her, that her blood smelled really good to James. She was in a psych ward, and that this vampire that worked at the psych ward really loved her, and so he turned her into a vampire to save her from James. And so he's like the one prey that James has lost over the years. So this gives them a bunch of context to Alice's backstory that they didn't otherwise have, because Alice has zero memory of being human, and she only remembers like waking up as a vampire. And her ability to see the future was the only reason she didn't end up super savage, they say, because nobody was there to help her. Now they know that vampire turned her to save her from James, and then James destroyed that vampire as a result. So that's why there was nobody there when she woke up. But then the only other thing is that Edward and Bella have the conversation where Edward is kind of talking about like Bella maybe going to Jacksonville and staying with her mom instead of staying in Forks and continuing to be with Edward, and Bella freaks out. And so then Edward's like, okay, I do need to leave her because that's what's best for her, but I'll wait until she's better so that I don't like mess with her health. And so then he decides to basically lie to her and pretend like he's going to stay with her when he's not. This is my least favorite thing that we find out in Midnight Sun. I hate that we find out that Edward was like pre-planning to leave her, and that he basically thinks to himself, there will be some kind of sign, I don't know what it is, but that will be my sign that it is time to leave, and then I'm going to leave. And so the whole thing that happens with Jasper and the glass is his sign that he should leave instead of being the thing that makes him think that he should. I hate that. I really, really do. It makes him feel so much ickier a character to me that he was like actively lying to her, knew he was lying to her, and went through those next few months and their whole prom exchange and all of that, fully aware of the fact that they were not going to be together forever, and he was like lying to her about that. It just feels so like classic man to me, like with you and lying to you about what he wants. So like it just made me feel really icky, and I did not like it. And we find out that he watches the video. I don't know that he ever tells Bella that, but he did watch the video that James made, so he does know what happened to Bella. He does like see the video, and that was kind of hard to read too. And that's the end of the book, y'all. We did it. We made it. We survived. I will say, final thoughts. Like I said, I'm a Midnight Sun defender. I really like this book, actually. As a massive Twilight fan, I think it's a great book for the fans. If you're not a massive fan of Twilight, I don't think you would like it at all. If you are a massive fan of Twilight, I think you would love it. Just don't go into it expecting it to be super action-packed. Most of it is Edward's internal monologue. And that's like basically what the entire book is just an inside foyer into his mind. Now, Stephenie Meyer herself has said, I'm never writing another book from Edward's perspective ever again. It was awful. I hated it. He's so depressed. I did not like being inside of his mind. It was awful, and I do not want to do that again. Which is disappointing because I would have loved to have gotten the entire Twilight series from Edward's perspective. I think it would have been really fun to see what he was up to during New Moon, although he says at some point that all he did was like lay around in a hotel room and mope. I'm sure she can retcon that. I'm sure she can come up with some stuff for him to have been doing, right? And then I feel like he hides stuff from her in Eclipse. I don't know if Eclipse would be that interesting from his perspective, but I definitely think Breaking Dawn would be fun. I don't know. I wish we were getting more, but she has been super duper adamant she's not doing anymore. She wants to write 2 more Twilight books. She hasn't announced what they are. A lot of speculation that one of them is going to be Renesmee's book. I don't know if it's going to end up being Jacob and Renesmee, if she would actually do that. I feel like she's somewhat resistant to write that book as a result. And the other one, like I said, my guess is that it's going to be an Alice prequel, but I'm not 100% sure about that. And she was kind of releasing them on a 5-year cadence. So I've been keeping my eyes peeled because this year is 5 years from when Midnight Sun is released, and it is still early enough in the year that they could announce it and release it in the latter half of the year. I'm keeping my eyes out, no promises. I have no inside information. I don't know anything. I haven't sensed anything in the Scottsdale air because I know both me and Stephenie Meyer live there. There aren't any vibes like telling me this, but just because they were kind of releasing them on a 5-year cadence, I'm like wondering if another one's gonna come out this year or not. That could be kind of fun. And if it does, you know I'm gonna make a video about it. I kind of hope that it does because I'm a little bit sad to be leaving the Twilight series behind because this one marks the end. I've made videos on all the books. I've said all I'm gonna say, and that feels weird. It feels strange to be done, especially as I'm sitting here in Bella's bathtub. Like, obviously my Twilight weekend isn't done. We have more time here, but my Twilight series is done, and I feel complete and yet nostalgic for video. I haven't even finished editing yet. And it's gonna take so much editing that I'm sure that by the time I'm done, I'm going to despise it. But as of right now, I'm really happy. I had a ton of fun here this weekend. Shout out to Marissa for inviting me. This was such a great trip, and they've been so nice about me filming all of this stuff while I've been here. It's just been such an amazing weekend, and we keep just like randomly turning to each other and being like, this is so great. This is so crazy that we're just like in the living room where they filmed this. It's clearly owned by people who are fans. There's a lot of really cool touches. There's a lot of really nice little Easter eggs and stuff. And it's just been a very wonderful experience. I just don't want to stop. I don't want to finish recording. I don't want to be done talking about my favorite series ever. But here we are. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I hope you enjoyed so much. I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!